Before the giant fell, David had already faced death. Long before Goliath, a predator came for his sheep. Then another beast came out of the wilderness. And once again, David stood between death and his flock. But the next enemy was not a beast. It was a giant. An entire army trembled. One shepherd stepped forward. He would not fight the giant like a soldier. He ran toward the giant with nothing but a sling and faith. And the giant fell. Everyone remembers how David defeated Goliath. But before he ever faced the giant, David had already learned what it meant to face death alone. Before David ever lifted a stone, before a single sling was loaded, one number should have given every soldier in that camp pause: 5,000 shekels of bronze, the weight the text itself assigns to Goliath's coat alone, which most scholarly reconstructions place somewhere around 125 pounds, depending on which ancient shekel standard is used. Add the helmet, greaves, javelin, and an iron spear point weighing roughly 15 pounds by the same reconstructions, and you get a soldier carrying a genuinely extraordinary load, even if the exact final number stays an estimate, not a certainty. Call him what the story makes him feel like, not a soldier, but a walking fortification. For 40 mornings, this figure walked into the valley and no one moved. Not the king, not the generals, not one of the thousands of trained men watching from the hills.
40 mornings of silence broken only by one voice, daring an entire nation to send a man who could stand against him.
To understand why an army of soldiers would not move, we have to understand exactly what they were looking at. Because the deeper you look into the details 1 Samuel 17 gives us about Goliath's equipment, the less this looks like a myth exaggerated for effect, and the more it looks like a precise, deliberate inventory of some of the most formidable infantry equipment documented anywhere in the region during this period. This is the story of that armor, what it was made of, what it meant. Who finally walked into that valley chose deliberately to leave nearly all of his own behind. To understand the armor, you first have to understand who was wearing it. The Philistines were not native to Canaan. Most historians trace them to the Sea Peoples, a wave of migrants, likely from the Aegean world, who settled the coastal plain of southern Canaan in the 12th century BC. By the time of this story, roughly 1,000 years before Christ, they controlled 5 major cities. More importantly, something Israel did not have: iron. 1 Samuel chapter 13 tells us plainly that there was no blacksmith to be found in all the land of Israel, because the Philistines had said, "Lest the Hebrews make swords or spears." Israelites had to travel to Philistine cities just to sharpen their farm tools. Historians debate exactly how far this gap extended. Iron was spreading unevenly across the whole region during this period, not a Philistine invention alone. But the biblical text is specific and consistent on this point. Philistia controlled the region's smithing, and Israel, for a time, did not. Whatever the broader regional picture, inside this story, one side had far greater access to advanced metalworking than the other. He represents an entire technological advantage walking downhill toward you. 1 Samuel 17 opens with both armies drawn up for battle on opposite hills, the valley between them. The kind of standoff where whoever attacks first attacks uphill, into the enemy's spears. Neither side wants to move first, the valley between them. The kind of standoff where whoever attacks first attacks uphill, into the enemy's spears. Neither side wants to move first. So the Philistines offer another option. A champion. One man, representing an entire army, would fight one Israelite in single combat, and the losing side would become subject to the winner. It was a known practice in the ancient Near East, reducing catastrophic bloodshed
to a single, decisive duel. But it only works as a strategy if your champion is, for all practical purposes, unbeatable.
And here the text stops rushing forward. It slows down. Verse by verse, it does something the rest of the chapter never does again. A pause like this is a signal. Pay attention to what you are about to be shown. His height alone, 6 cubits and a span. And here the text stops rushing forward. It slows down. Verse by verse, it does something the rest of the chapter never does again. It stops to inventory, piece by piece, exactly what this man is wearing. That pause is not filler. In a narrative this fast-moving, a pause like this is a signal. Pay attention to what you are about to be shown. His height alone, 6 cubits and a span, by the most widely used Hebrew manuscript tradition, somewhere near 9.5 feet. Some earlier textual traditions, including a Dead Sea Scroll fragment and the Septuagint, record 4 cubits and a span, closer to 6'9". Still exceptional, still taller than any man in the Israelite camp, but a real reminder that even ancient scribes were wrestling with how to transmit a number this extraordinary. Either way, the man in front of David was the tallest thing in the valley by a significant margin. Then the helmet, bronze, fitted close to the skull, a standard feature of period Aegean and Philistine armor, distinct from the leather and felt headgear more typical in the region. It marks him immediately as something foreign, something imported from a more advanced military tradition. Then the coat. The Hebrew text calls it a coat of scales, armor built from hundreds of small overlapping bronze plates sewn onto a fabric or leather backing, functioning almost like flexible chainmail. Its weight is given directly, 5,000 shekels of bronze. Using the standard shekel weight of the period, that lands the coat itself somewhere around 125 pounds. Worn on the body, in the sun, in a bronze greaves guard his shins, a detail almost nowhere else in the Hebrew Bible. Again pointing to specifically Aegean-style equipment, functioning almost like flexible chainmail. Its weight is given directly, 5,000 shekels of bronze, using the standard shekel weight of the period, and slung across his shoulders a javelin of bronze, a secondary throwing weapon most infantry never carried at all.
And then the spear. The text reaches for something Israelite audiences would immediately understand. Its shaft, it says, was like a weaver's beam.
The thick roller bar of a loom, an object every household with a loom would have recognized on sight. This was not a spear you could throw with any accuracy. It was a spear built for one purpose, to be planted and driven forward with the full weight of a massive man behind it, punching through shield and armor alike. And its iron point weighed 600 shekels, around 15 pounds of iron on the tip alone. In a region where Israel could barely produce a plow blade. Add it together, and by conservative modern reconstructions, Goliath may have been carrying somewhere close to 200 pounds of bronze and iron. And he did not even carry his own shield. The text specifically notes that a shield bearer walked ahead of him, because managing a shield large enough to matter, on top of everything else, required a second man. This was not one soldier standing in the valley. This was, functionally, a small mobile weapons platform, requiring an escort, 40 days running, daring anyone to come close enough to find out if it could be beaten. Here is what the armor communicates, that the height alone does not. This was not a story about a big man. Height, on its own, is a disadvantage.
As often as an advantage, a taller target, a higher center of gravity, more surface area to strike. What made Goliath nearly unbeatable was that his size
Was combined with a level of personal protection, scale armor, a fitted helmet, greaves, that few, if any, fighters in the region could match at the time, assembled onto a body strong enough to actually carry and wield it. Bronze scale armor of this completeness was, by archaeological evidence, associated with elite,
professionally trained soldiers, not common infantry. Most fighters in this era, Israelite or Philistine, went into battle with a shield, maybe a helmet,
and whatever weapon they could afford. Full-scale armor, greaves, a dedicated helmet, and both a primary spear and a secondary javelin represented an investment.
What that moment actually is. Saul is not simply being kind. Saul is offering David the single closest equivalent Israel possesses to what Goliath is wearing.
His own royal equipment, the best armor in the entire camp. And David takes it off. Takes it off. Not because it was heavy in some vague sense, though the text tells us plainly he had not tested it and could not walk in it. He removes it because the entire logic of this confrontation, the logic that had frozen an army for 40 days, was a logic of matched equipment. Picture what Goliath actually saw walking toward him. Not an armed challenger matching his own scale of equipment. A boy, unarmored, carrying tools for driving off wolves from a flock, tools for killing a trained soldier. The text tells us directly that Goliath was insulted by it. He says so himself, asking if he is a dog, that a boy should come at him with sticks. This was not fear.
This was a professional soldier recognizing that the rules of the duel he had spent 40 days enforcing were being broken in front of him.
By someone who apparently did not understand, or did not care, how badly outmatched he was supposed to be. But David's own words, recorded just before this, make clear he understood the mismatch completely. He names it directly, sword, spear, javelin, and states plainly that he is coming with something else entirely. Not equal force, not matched armor, a different basis for the fight altogether. This is the hinge the entire story turns on. Every ounce of that bronze and iron had been assembled to win a very specific kind of fight, the kind Israel had been too afraid to enter for 40 straight days. David simply declined to enter it. And here is the detail modern reconstructions keep confirming. A trained slinger with a leather sling of this period was not a joke.
Later Greek and Roman writers describe skilled slingers hurling stones with enough force to cause serious injury or death at real range.
And some modern experimental studies estimate sling stones could travel at speeds fast enough to be genuinely lethal against an unprotected target. The exact numbers are debated and vary by reconstruction, but the consensus across ancient and modern sources agrees on this much. Slings were a legitimate, feared battlefield weapon, not an improvised toy, which is why armies across the ancient Near East, and later Greece and Rome, fielded slingers as a standard respected unit. Which brings the inventory back around. Every piece the text described, helmet, coat, greaves, shield, covered most of the body. But a bronze helmet of this period protects the skull. It does not, and structurally cannot, protect the exposed face beneath its rim.
That was not a flaw unique to Goliath's armor. It was a basic limitation of helmet design at the time. But it was still a real,
exploitable gap on the one man in the valley everyone assumed was unstoppable. And David, a shepherd who had spent years perfecting the same skill against lions and bears threatening his flock, put a stone through that gap at range before Goliath's own weapons, built for a completely different kind of fight, at close range, against a matched opponent, were ever brought to bear at all. The armor was not a weakness in the story. It was the whole point. Every ounce of it had been assembled to guarantee victory in one specific kind of contest.
David never agreed to that contest. He chose the range, the weapon, and the moment. The armor could protect Goliath only from the kind of attack it was designed to stop.
And the stone did not need to defeat 200 pounds of armor. It needed to find the one place the armor did not cover. The armor could protect Goliath only from the kind of attack it was designed to stop. David found the gap. Goliath fell. The armor did exactly what armor was supposed to do. It remained intact, but its wearer was down. David had never needed to defeat the armor. He had needed to defeat the assumption that armor made Goliath unbeatable. Even the final detail carries this same reversal. David kills Goliath with the stone, but the text specifies he had no sword of his own, so he draws Goliath's blade to complete it. The champion's own weapon, built to be the last word in a fight fought his way, becomes the instrument of his defeat. And the army that had frozen for 40 days is freed in an instant, because the entire deadlock had rested on a single assumption, that this fight could only be won on Goliath's terms. Once that assumption broke, so did the standoff. The armor had promised a certain kind of victory, but the battle had never become that kind of fight. Somewhere near 200 pounds, by the best estimates we have, of bronze and iron, representing the height of what this region's armies could field. 40 days of silence from an entire army that understood exactly what that weight meant. And in the end, none of it mattered. From the ancient Near East, not because a big man lost, because the armor itself, every carefully inventoried piece of it, represents the precise thing it takes to defeat. Not the size of what you're facing, but the terms it's demanding you fight on. Goliath walked into that valley for 40 mornings, certain of the only kind of fight he knew how to fight.
David walked down on the 41st and simply refused to have it.